Kalen Morrow moved carefully among the charred rocks and twisted ash trees, his hands brushing against the few green shoots that stubbornly pushed through the black soil. The valley of Drakthar had always been harsh, but the recent eruptions had turned it nearly unlivable. Rivers of molten rock ran like veins through the cliffs, and the sky was a constant swirl of smoke and embers. Humans here were rare, always hunted or driven away, and yet Kalen refused to leave. He tended a small patch of garden that grew between volcanic stones, nurturing plants that no dragon would ever touch. It was quiet, except for the occasional crack of falling rocks or the distant roar of dragons flying high above. He hummed softly to himself as he worked, the rhythm keeping him steady. The garden was fragile, a tiny oasis of life in a land ruled by fire and fear. Every day Kalen risked the dragon's wrath just by stepping outside. That morning, as he watered a line of stubborn green shoots, he heard a strange noise, a soft, pitiful sound almost like a whimper. Kalen froze, his heart racing. Dragons didn't make soft noises. They were loud, proud, and terrifying. But this was different. He followed the sound, moving carefully over jagged rocks and avoiding the fissures that glowed with heat. There, under a broken branch, was a tiny dragon hatchling. Its scales were dull and its wings small and crumpled. It hissed weakly, eyes wide and terrified. Kalen's stomach tightened. He knew the rules. Dragons were dangerous, and humans who meddled with them often did not survive. But he could not leave the hatchling. Something about its helplessness stirred a courage he could not ignore. He crouched low, speaking softly, letting the creature see his hands were empty. The hatchling trembled. A thin thread of smoke hissed from its nostrils, and Kalen held his breath. He lifted the branch with careful hands, keeping his fingers far from sharp claws. The dragon did not lash out. It just stared, fragile and scared. Kalen reached into his satchel and pulled out scraps of his own meager food, a dried root and a handful of roasted nuts. He placed them on a flat stone, stepping back slowly. The hatchling sniffed, then nibbled. Kalen's chest tightened with relief. He had no idea what he was doing, but he could not let the small life before him die. Days passed. The hatchling, whom Kalen began to call Ashling, followed him everywhere, moving cautiously, hiding behind rocks when dragons passed overhead. Kalen shared every meal he could spare, sometimes going hungry himself. He spoke to Ashling in quiet tones, telling stories of humans long gone, of courage, hope, and survival. Ashling listened, tilting its head, sometimes curling near Kalen at night, seeking warmth. Yet the valley was never truly safe. On the third day, Kalen saw shadows above him, dragon scouts, their wings blotting out the sun. He froze, knowing that discovery meant death. Ashling hissed, low and frightened, pressing close to his leg. Kalen's mind raced. He had to act, but how could a human outwit a dragon? He grabbed a small, charred branch and threw it toward a rocky crevice. The sound echoed, drawing the dragon's attention. Ashling hid behind him, and Kalen moved quickly, leading the scouts on a small, careful chase. They were faster than him, stronger, but they lacked the human cunning. He led them over unstable ground, into smoke plumes from a vent, and then ducked into a narrow tunnel too tight for their massive bodies. The scouts circled the entrance, roaring in frustration. Kalen exhaled slowly, Ashling brushing against his leg, unharmed. By evening he returned to his garden. The air was thick with ash, and the small plants had suffered from the heat, but they had survived. Kalen knelt beside them, hands dirty, sweat stinging his eyes. He glanced at Ashling, who nuzzled his hand and felt something he had not felt in years: hope. This tiny creature depended on him, and somehow, against impossible odds, they had survived another day. But even as he rested, he knew this was only the beginning. The dragons would not forget the hatchling. The royal scouts would report back. Every act of kindness was a challenge to their rule. Kalen could feel the tension tightening like a coil in his chest. He had saved Ashling, yes, but he had also drawn the eyes of a powerful enemy. Night fell over the valley. The firelit sky glowed, and distant roars echoed across the cliffs. Kalen wrapped Ashling in a piece of cloth, holding the tiny dragon close. He whispered promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Tomorrow they would face new dangers, perhaps far greater than today. But he would not run. He could not. Because some things, some lives, were worth standing against a world that wanted them crushed. And somewhere in the dark, above the cliffs, the first shadows of the royal scouts returned, circling, waiting, watching. Kalen woke before dawn, the valley still glowing with faint embers from the previous day's volcanic activity. Ashling, the tiny dragon, stirred beside him, its wings trembling in the cold morning air. He rubbed his eyes, listening to the distant roar of dragons circling high above the cliffs. Every sound could be danger. Every shadow could be a scout sent from the high throne. He had hoped that the day would be calm, that the royal dragons might forget about the hatchling. But he was wrong. The moment he stepped outside, he saw them, four dragons, massive and scarlet, moving silently through the smoke-laden sky. Their wings blotted the rising sun. Kalen's stomach tightened. These were not scouts, they were enforcers, soldiers of the monarchy. They were here to take Aisling. Aisling hissed, low and frightened, curling into Kalen's side. The human knelt, whispering in soft tones, "It's okay, little one. Stay calm. Trust me." But his heart pounded as he realized the truth. He could not outrun them. They were faster, stronger, and far more lethal. A single misstep and they would incinerate him and the hatchling with him. Kalen's mind raced. The valley was harsh, but it was also full of dangers and traps that he knew better than any dragon. He scanned the ground quickly, rock fissures, volcanic vents, loose boulders, and made a plan. If he could lure the dragons into the narrow canyon behind his garden, their size and power would become a disadvantage. They could not maneuver as easily in tight spaces, and he could use smoke and ash to obscure their vision. He grabbed a few loose rocks, throwing them toward a ridge far from his garden. The clatter echoed, drawing the dragons' attention. They turned, scanning for movement, and Kalen seized the moment. He scooped Aisling into his arms and ran, moving as quickly as the jagged terrain would allow. The dragon hatchling wriggled, frightened but not resisting, and Kalen whispered encouragement, "Just a little further. You can do this." The royal dragons followed, their massive wings sending gusts that toppled smaller rocks and sent ash swirling. Kalen stumbled, his hands scraping against jagged stone, but he forced himself onward. One misstep and he would fall into the molten streams below. He could feel Aisling trembling against his chest, tiny claws digging into his shirt. Fear surged, but he clenched his jaw, ignoring the pain. Failure was not an option. Reaching the canyon, he darted into its narrow entrance. The dragons hesitated, their wings brushing the walls, sparks flying where their claws struck rock. Kalen ducked behind a jagged outcrop, catching his breath while listening to the dragons' frustrated roars. He had underestimated nothing. Every second counted. He scanned the canyon, eyes sharp. He noticed the vent in the canyon floor, molten gas bubbling, unstable. An idea formed. He moved quickly, dislodging loose rocks above the vent, aiming them toward the canyon floor. The rocks tumbled, hitting the vent and sending plumes of scalding gas into the air. The dragons recoiled, hissing, coughing, their scales singed by the sudden burst. Aisling clung tightly to Kalen, wide-eyed but unharmed. Kalen's heart raced as he led them deeper into the canyon. He dropped small obsidian shards in their path, creating mirrors of light and smoke that disoriented the dragons further. They tried to roar and claw at him, but their massive bodies were clumsy in the narrow passage. Kalen felt a surge of determination. He was human, fragile, and yet here he was outwitting creatures far stronger than himself. Courage and intelligence were his weapons. After what felt like hours, he finally reached a hidden tunnel only a human and a tiny dragon could fit through. He pressed Aisling against his chest and slipped inside. The dragons tried to follow but became wedged, their wings scraping against the walls, forcing them to retreat in frustration. Kalen exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and fear tightening his chest. They were safe, for now. He emerged on the other side of the canyon, bruised and exhausted, and placed Aisling gently on the ground. The hatchling looked up at him with wide eyes, curling against his leg. "You're brave," Kalen whispered, ruffling its small head. "We'll survive this. I promise." But even as he said the words, he knew it was only the beginning. The royal dragons would not give up. They would return stronger and more determined. Night fell over the valley and Kalen wrapped Aisling in a cloth, keeping the little dragon warm. He stared at the glowing embers in the distance, thinking of the dangers ahead. Every act of kindness, every moment of courage had drawn attention. He had saved Aisling, yes, but he had also made himself a target of the most powerful creatures in DracoWar. He felt a fire in his chest, not just fear but determination. He would not run. He would not hide. A human's strength was not measured by scales or claws, but by courage, intelligence, and heart. He would protect Aisling no matter the cost. And somewhere above the cliffs, the shadows of the royal dragons circled, watching, waiting for their next opportunity. The valley was quiet, but only for a moment. The storm was coming. Kalen crouched behind a jagged boulder, the cold night air cutting through his thin clothes. Aisling pressed against his chest, small claws clinging tightly. Above, the royal dragons circled silently, their wings stirring the smoke like dark clouds. Every sound from the valley below echoed to them, every movement a signal. Kalen knew he could not fight these dragons directly. He was human, fragile, clever, and determined, but fragile nonetheless. He had a plan though. There were whispers among the exiled and outlawed dragons of a hidden place called the Caverns of Whispered Wings. Few humans had ever survived near it, and fewer dragons would dare go there. It was said the caverns held those who opposed the monarchy, dragons who believed in coexistence, not cruelty. If he could reach them, he might find allies, and perhaps a chance to keep Aisling alive. The journey was perilous. The valley floor was jagged and unstable. Rivers of molten rock cut paths like burning veins. Smoke stung his eyes, and every step brought the risk of being spotted. He moved cautiously, calculating each step, testing rocks for stability, listening for the faintest shift of claws or the flutter of wings. Aisling, surprisingly agile despite its size, followed closely, occasionally letting out a low hiss when danger neared. Kalen whispered encouragement, "Almost there. Stay with me." Hours passed. He climbed over a ridge and spotted the entrance to the caverns, partially hidden behind a veil of hanging ash and rock. Relief surged, but it was brief. Shadows moved across the entrance. Dragons were already here. Kalen froze, heart hammering. 4 of the monarchy's elite enforcers blocked the path, their eyes glowing in the dark. One beat of their wings and the entire ridge could collapse. Kalen's mind raced. He could not fight them head-on. But he could use his knowledge of the terrain. A narrow fissure ran beside the cavern's mouth. Too small for dragons to pass, it could serve as a channel. He whispered to Aisling, "Through here. Quickly." The hatchling scurried into the fissure, silent and careful. Kalen followed, pushing against the tight rock. The dragons roared, claws scraping, but could not follow. Inside the caverns, the air was cool and damp. The walls glittered with crystals, reflecting the faint light and casting shadows that danced like living things. Kalen let out a shaky breath, holding Aisling close. He had made it this far, but the danger was far from over. The caves were home to dragons who mistrusted humans, and he had no guarantee of welcome. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and lean, with scales of deep blue that shimmered in the dim light. "Who dares enter the caverns of whispered wings?" the dragon asked, voice low and cautious. Kalen stepped forward, hands raised. "I am Kalen Morrow, a human. I come with this hatchling. We seek allies against the High Throne's tyranny." The dragon's eyes narrowed. "A human, and you carry a dragon. You risk death by stepping here. Why should we trust you?" Kalen swallowed hard. "Because I have no other choice. This hatchling is innocent. The monarchy wants to destroy it. I cannot allow that. I can help. I can think. I can plan. I can fight with my mind even if I am weak compared to claws and wings." The dragon studied him, tilting its head. "I am Lyriel," she said finally, "and I have grown tired of the throne's cruelty. Your courage is unusual for your kind. Perhaps there is hope." She stepped aside. Shadows shifted behind her, revealing dragons of various sizes and colors, all watching silently, wary. Some hissed softly, others clicked their teeth. Kalen felt the weight of their scrutiny. He knelt, setting Aisling on the crystal floor. "I need your guidance. I need a plan. We cannot hide forever. They will come for us again, stronger and more determined." Lyriel's gaze softened. "You are brave, human, and clever. That may be enough. We will help you for now. But you must prove your worth. The monarchy will not be stopped by kindness alone. Strategy, courage, and sacrifice will be required." Kalen nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and resolve. He had found allies, but the stakes had only grown. Together, he and Lyriel began mapping the valley, identifying routes, choke points, and potential traps. They tested escape paths, rehearsed diversions, and calculated risks. Every move required precision. Every error could be fatal. As the hours passed, Kalen realized that Aisling was learning too. The hatchling's small eyes took in the shadows of the caverns, the movement of dragons, and the human's careful instructions. Aisling's instincts were sharpening. It was learning to trust him, to act, to survive. And in return, Kalen felt a growing bond, a courage born not just of self-preservation, but of responsibility, care, and hope. But the night was not quiet. From the cavern's entrance, the faint, distant sounds of flying wings reached them, more royal scouts. They were closer now, hunting, circling, relentless. Kalen's heart tightened. Time was short. They would strike before dawn, and the caverns would not protect them forever. He looked down at Aisling, whose tiny wings shivered against his chest. "We have allies," he whispered. "We have a plan. But the real test is coming. We must be ready, or we'll lose everything." The shadows outside the cavern shifted again, and a low, menacing roar echoed through the tunnels. The monarchy was coming. Kalen clenched his fists. He would not back down. Not now. Not ever. Kalen crouched in the shadows at the base of Valkaren's spire, the volcanic citadel of the dragon monarchy. Aisling pressed close, wings trembling with anticipation. The spire rose like a jagged spear into the smoky sky, molten rivers flowing around its foundation. The roar of distant dragons echoed from the heights, a constant reminder that they were in enemy territory. Kalen's heart pounded. He was human, fragile, exposed, but he carried something far stronger: courage, determination, and the trust of a tiny dragon who believed in him. Lyriel appeared beside him, scales glinting in the dim light. "We cannot charge in blindly," she warned. "The throne's defenses are cunning. Fire vents, crystal traps, and elite guards. One wrong step and you'll be reduced to ash." Kalen nodded, studying the layout. He had spent days memorizing every path, fissure, and vent from their scouting of the valley. "We'll use the vents and shadows," he said. "They know what to expect in the open. But in the tunnels we can control the fight." The plan was risky. The vents were unstable and timing had to be perfect. Kalen led Aisling through a narrow tunnel that opened beneath the spire. Lyriel and a handful of rogue dragons followed silently. Above, the royal enforcers circled, massive and scarlet, their wings beating gusts that could collapse the tunnel if disturbed. Every step Kalen took required precision. A single miscalculation could collapse the passage or alert the throne's guards. As they approached the first vent, Kalen signaled. The rogue dragons pressed against the walls, while Aisling remained close to him. With a careful nudge, Kalen triggered a small rock slide that sent a cloud of ash and smoke spiraling upward. The royal dragons roared, momentarily blinded. The tunnel's narrow walls amplified the noise, disorienting them further. Kalen exhaled slowly. This was the edge of possibility, the moment where human ingenuity could outmatch brute strength. They moved quickly, navigating twisting corridors, avoiding heat vents, and using mirrors of obsidian scattered on the floor to reflect light and confuse their enemies. Kalen whispered instructions to Aisling, who listened with remarkable attentiveness. The hatchling darted forward at critical moments, distracting the guards with sudden bursts of movement, small flames, and clever hisses. Every action had a purpose. Every choice mattered. Finally, they reached the throne chamber, a cavernous space carved from volcanic rock, glowing with molten veins. At its center sat the monarch, a colossal dragon with golden scales that shimmered like liquid metal. Its eyes blazed with fury. "You dare enter my domain?" it thundered, sending shockwaves through the chamber. Kalen stepped forward, holding Aisling high so the monarch could see the hatchling's small, innocent form. "I come not to destroy," he shouted, voice steady despite fear, "but to show that humans are not weak. We can be courageous. We can be clever. And we can protect life where you choose cruelty." The monarch hissed, flames licking its jaws. Guards surged forward, but Kalen anticipated the attack. He had mapped every path, every vent, every crystal trap. With quick thinking, he triggered a series of collapses along the edges of the chamber, sending molten rock barriers between the guards and the rogue dragons. Aisling flitted ahead, leading some of the monarch's guards into false corridors and smoke clouds. Kalen moved with agility and focus, dodging claws and fire blasts. His body was bruised and scorched, but his mind was sharp. He used the terrain, vent bursts, and Aisling's speed to outmaneuver dragons far larger and stronger than himself. Every second, every decision showcased human ingenuity, a frail body surviving by sheer intelligence, courage, and determination. When he finally reached the monarch, he placed Aisling gently on a rock between them. "See this?" he shouted. "This is life you would destroy. This is trust, loyalty, and hope. A human saved this creature not through strength but through courage and care. Look at what we can achieve together." The monarch blinked, startled by the boldness and clarity of the human's words. Its eyes flicked to Aisling, who looked up with quiet determination. Something shifted: hesitation, curiosity, perhaps even admiration. The throne's rage faltered. The elite guards paused, unsure how to respond to a human who had just survived impossible odds in their sacred chamber. Kalen seized the moment. He pressed forward, speaking calmly but firmly. "The monarchy rules through fear. You can continue that path, or you can see what we humans and dragons together can accomplish. Compassion is not weakness. Courage is not defiance. This hatchling shows it. The room was silent except for the distant drip of molten rock. Even the monarch seemed to weigh the truth in the human's words. Kalen felt a tremor of relief, but he remained alert. This confrontation was only won through intellect, bravery, and careful timing. One mistake now could undo everything. Finally, the monarch lowered its massive head slightly, a signal that it would hear him. Kalen exhaled, heart pounding, knowing he had survived, yes, but more importantly he had made the first crack in a centuries-old system. For the first time, the monarchy might see humans as more than prey, more than weaklings. He had not just fought with fire and courage, he had fought with heart and mind, and that was a victory far greater than survival. Outside the chamber, the rogue dragons cheered quietly, and Aisling flapped its small wings in excitement. Kalen's body ached, his skin scorched, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. Against impossible odds, a human had faced the might of an empire and survived. But even as he looked at the monarch, a new awareness stirred in his mind. This was only the beginning. Change would not come easily. The Valley of DracoWar would still resist. The monarchy would still test him. And yet, for the first time he had proven that courage, intelligence, and morality could overcome even the most terrifying power. Kalen held Aisling close. "We've survived the throne," he whispered. "Now we show them what humans can do." The Valley of DracoWar was quiet now, but the silence was not peace. Molten rivers still flowed and smoke drifted in the sky, but something had shifted. Humans were no longer merely prey, and dragons were no longer the untouchable rulers of fear. Kalen Morrow stood atop a ridge, Aisling perched beside him and looked out over the landscape. Every scar in the rocks, every singed tree, told the story of what had happened. The rebellion of courage, the defiance of a single human against impossible odds. The morning sun hit the horizon, painting the valley in gold and red. Kalen's body ached from the battle at Valkaran Spire. Cuts, burns, and bruises reminded him of every calculated risk, every instant where death had been possible. But it also reminded him of why he had fought. Aisling, now stronger and more confident, nudged his hand with tiny claws, scales glinting in the sunlight. The hatchling had survived. Thrived even. And Kalen knew that the bond between them was more than trust. It was hope. The dragons of the Rogue Alliance gathered around him. Lyriel's deep blue scales shimmered as she spoke. "You have done what few believed possible, human. You faced the monarchy's might and survived. Not through fire or claws but through heart and mind." Kalen nodded, feeling the weight of her words. Recognition from a dragon scholar carried more meaning than any applause a human could give. "Is it enough?" he asked quietly, scanning the valley below. "Will the monarchy accept this change?" Lyriel shook her head. "Not yet. The High Throne is ancient and stubborn. But you have shown them what humans are capable. Courage, intelligence, and morality can challenge even centuries of dominance. That is the first step." Kalen looked at Aisling, who opened its wings slightly, practicing balance and flight. He had seen the hatchling grow from a fragile, frightened creature into a young dragon capable of decision, strategy, and loyalty. The same growth had happened within him. He was no longer just a gardener exiled from his own people. He was a symbol. A single human could change the rules of an entire kingdom. The day passed with the humans and dragons working together to rebuild small communities. Survivors who had hidden in the valley crept from their shelters, eyes wide with astonishment. They had heard whispers of what had happened at Valkaran Spire, but seeing a human stand among dragons, unharmed and respected, was a revelation. Humans began to tend to the land, repair shelters, and plant new gardens. Dragons, inspired by Kalen's courage, offered protection and guidance instead of domination. But even in this moment of fragile peace, danger was not gone. Scouts from the monarchy still patrolled the outer cliffs. The valley's fires could flare again at any moment. Kalen knew the fight for lasting change was only beginning. He gathered his allies, rogue dragons, humans who had survived the valley, and even some curious young dragons who had watched him with wonder. "We will not rely on fear," he told them. "We will rely on courage, intelligence, and heart. That is how humans survive, and how we can teach dragons to do the same." The monarch of Valkaran Spire eventually came down from its throne, massive and golden, eyes flicking between Kalen and Aisling. It did not roar or strike. Instead it observed. The small human who had defied its entire empire now stood calm, steady, and unshakable. Aisling stepped forward, small but fearless. The monarch's massive claws hovered above them, but it withdrew. A signal, a grudging respect, perhaps, or recognition of a force greater than fear. Kalen's chest swelled with a mix of relief and pride. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that the monarchy could challenge them again, but the seed of change had been planted. One human, one act of kindness had sparked a revolution not through power alone, but through courage, ingenuity, and moral clarity. As night fell, the valley glowed with the light of molten rivers and campfires of survivors. Kalen and Aisling sat atop a ridge, looking down at the flickering lights. "We've done it," Aisling seemed to say with a soft hiss, leaning against him. Kalen smiled. "We've started it. And it's just the beginning." He thought of the days when he had tended his small garden alone, fearing dragons at every step. Those days had seemed insignificant, powerless. But every choice, every act of courage, even small ones, had built to this moment. He realized that being human did not mean being weak. It meant having the determination to face impossible odds, the intelligence to plan, and the heart to act even when everything seemed lost. Kalen whispered to the valley, to the dragons and humans alike, "A human's strength is not in claws or fire, but in courage, in heart, and in hope. Remember that." Above, the stars began to pierce the smoky sky. Aisling flapped its wings experimentally, catching the wind, learning freedom. Kalen watched, feeling a warmth in his chest that no fire could match. The valley would rebuild, dragons and humans learning together, and the story of one human's bravery would ripple through generations. The monarchy had been challenged, the valley had been changed, and Kalen had proven what humans could do against impossible odds. In the end, it was not just survival, it was triumph. And for the first time, the dragons of DracoWar saw humans as something more than prey, they saw the extraordinary.